Welcome to Decades of Heistery. We'll continue our journey through February 1926 safe-cracking and bank-robbing exploits. We'll meet two couples whose violent exploits netted them over $1 million at the cost of the murder of an Indiana deputy sheriff. Texas sees what appears to have been a casual robbery between friends, and we witness a shootout in Indianapolis where some 20-somethings rob and plan to rob more area banks. That is, until a secret raid foils their plans. We head back to Texas for yet another foiled robbery, this time by, quote, a bit of a blonde girl, end quote. This heist ends with gunplay and bloodhounds. We'll conclude February's heists with a farmer's guilt leading to the recovery of approximately $4,000 of loot buried in coffee cans in his field. We now revisit the robbers from that Lippen, Texas robbery that occurred in January 1926, and now we bring them into the future, sort of. So the Brownsville Herald picks up with the Lippen, Texas robbery, along with what appears to be the simultaneous Strawn State Bank robbery nearby Lippen, Texas, in Strawn, Texas. The Palo Pinto County, Texas Sheriff Gib Abernathy and W.D. Stevens, who was a cashier at the Strawn State Bank, traveled to Camden, Arkansas, where Fred Stratton, Charlie Roberts, and John Roberts were being held. You'll recall those names from one of the January episodes of this bank robbery in Lippen, Texas. According to this article, these guys were responsible for the Strawn State Bank robbery. However, that can't be the case because at least as of February 1926, Fred, Charlie, and John were busy the exact day, the exact time of robbing the bank in Lippen, Texas. In support of that, and not surprisingly, neither Gibb nor Stevens were able to identify that trio as three who were involved in robbing the Strawn Bank. However, the robbers made some comments connecting them to the Lippen Bank, which was why they were being held. The three, Stratton, Roberts, and Roberts, stated that they would seemingly gladly return to Texas for a trial. It seemed like they almost wanted to go to Texas. So more on that, more on why they may have wanted to be extradited from Arkansas to Texas. Not sure why. In the meantime, Arkansas officials said they would not release the trio to the Texas officers unless they received the bank robber reward that was due. Sheriff Newton of Camden, Arkansas, pending receipt of the reward, stated that the trio would be held in Camden, Arkansas and tried on auto theft charges that had been pending on the three. So back east we go, where we run into a more violent crew of would-be Bonnie and Clyde type of bank robbers. They include Frank Taylor, who was 24, Forrest Norris, who was 21, Mrs. Cecilia Retzel, Reitzel, who was 22, and Miss Alice Mayer, 23. So in a sense they form two Bonnie and Clyde-esque couples. I'm not sure why Retzel, Reitzel, is called Mrs., while Mayer is called Miss. But we'll see them later on held as material witnesses, and maybe that'll be clarified then. Regardless, they were arraigned in Philadelphia with the purpose of extraditing them to Indiana. It seems they were wanted for bank robbery and the subsequent murder of a sheriff's deputy in the Kentucky-Indiana area. The four were staying briefly in Philadelphia. One of the couples was in a hotel, the other in a boarding house. I think they cleverly separated for safety and security and not to draw more attention on themselves. So what happened? One of the four sent a coded telegram to some of their compatriots, their peers, who were in a Louisville, Kentucky jail. They encouraged their peers to try to escape and head up to Philadelphia to join the two pairs of Bonnies and Clydes. The telegram, however, was intercepted and the code was deciphered. The four were charged with attempted robbery on January 24, 1926, of the Lanesville, Indiana Merchants Bank, according to a period newspaper, and the Farmers State Bank, according to a fantastic in memoriam page managed by Floyd County, Indiana Sheriff's Office. There's a Facebook page and other pages as well on the killing of, the slaying of Deputy Sheriff Mayfield. Mayfield and a posse ambushed the four, we believe it was the two couples, in New Albany, Kentucky. Sheriff Jacob Yenowine, Yenowine, and New Albany, Kentucky officers Clarence Elliott, John Fisher, and Daniel Wilson were also involved in this shootout that occurred. Per this in memoriam page, the suspects actually were comprised of 6 men. So was it 6 men or was it 4 people, 2 men and 2 women? That information is a bit confused or muddled. Deputy Sheriff Daniel Alonzo Mayfield is not to be confused with the robber of the same last name, Mayfield, that we saw in Arkansas, who we chronicled in a previous January 1926 robbery. And Louisville, Kentucky Police Chief John McGillicuddy, I looked for a photograph of him but couldn't find one, but there is at a website called Find a Grave, just spell it out just like it sounds. Under, I found a great page on him and his descendants under Captain John B. McGillicuddy. Anyway, McGillicuddy relayed the information to Philadelphia area police, and he was involved in the quartet's arrest. According to police, the crew had been, quote, terrorizing small towns along the Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois borders for months, end quote. They were credited with amassing over $1 million from various bank robberies. Now, we tend to sometimes romanticize the 1920s and 30s and even find the robbers kind of endearing in their own black sheep kind of way, but these Bonnie and Clyde, more kind of like thrill kill wild people, are not at all appealing. In support of that, we see the quartet having been held in Philadelphia, harboring a little bit of hope for an escape. They were unaware, however, that the police had gotten information that a, quote, gang of gunmen, end quote, would be waiting at the railroad station when Indiana police escorted Taylor, Morris, Retzel, and Mayer to the railroad station to be returned to Indiana. The plan from the robbers' perspective was to board a train at Broad Street Station and the Pennsylvania Railroad. That was their understanding. Indiana detectives changed the plan and took them to a different station and a completely different railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. That information that was intercepted, who knows how many innocent injuries and deaths were avoided because of that. So hopefully more information to come on these Bonnie and Clydes, how the resolution as they make their way through court as well. So thankfully we can turn from something kind of distasteful to something kind of strangely amusing in a way. With that, we return back down to Texas to a town called Krum, K-R-U-M. And the tale begins with 2 old friends, Dr. A.H. Knox from Krum, Texas, and a man called Yancey Story of Denton, Texas. Story is spelled, incidentally, S-T-O-R-Y, but also S-T-O-R-R-I-E. It's used interchangeably in different articles and different websites. Apparently Knox was a regular visitor of the valley, and since the story occurs in February, it sounds like he was kind of a snowbird, a 1920s version of a snowbird, meaning he lived up north when the weather was nice, and when it became inclement up there, he went down south to Texas and then reversed and headed back north. But that's just my speculation based on some of the details. Nevertheless, Krum was at his bank, actually acting as cashier one day. It's the First State Bank. His old friend Yancey Story comes into the bank one morning and they start to talk. And what was the subject that Story brought up? Bank robberies. Some would call that predictive programming. Anyway, during the conversation, Story stated he was going to rob the bank at Krum that afternoon. And Knox, naturally, I would assume, thought to himself that Story was just joking around. True to his word, though, Story appeared that afternoon and Quote, "No one told me to hold up my hands, and I never thought to do so. I just stood and watched them take the money," end quote, according to Dr. Knox. Story was caught and convicted and received 99 years for his crime, with 16 charges still pending. However, Story's story doesn't end here, nor did it begin there. An internet search of Yancey's story of Denton, Texas reveals the first 7 results that come up, at least when I searched, were related to various bank robberies, various arrests, and even the searches for a grave or graves on Yancey Story's ranch. So there's tons of information on this. We can add accomplices to the Crumb robbery bank. That includes Robert C. Story, presumably a relative of Yancey Story, although his last name is spelled Storrie, as well as Jack Hawthorne, and an additional unnamed person of interest, I assume a male. So Robert C. Story was arrested by a Texas Ranger named Captain Hickman, and he was taken to Dallas. That arrest occurred August of 1925. The robbery dated having taken place June 9 of 1925. So this also won't be in the tracker, but it is interesting information with fallout definitely into 1926. So the sheriff had gotten Story and Hawthorne, but he wasn't done yet. He got a second warrant, deputized 10 men, and went to search the 1,300-acre ranch that was used by Story, the Stories, the Story Gang, as I've seen it called as well. This ranch was owned by Mrs. B.L. Chadwick, and the search was for the grave of an unidentified, quote, Negro, end quote, who probably, based on other information, was probably G.C. Sewell, who apparently lived on that same 1,300-acre ranch, which was called the Litsey Ranch, L-I-T-S-E-Y. Additional warrants were executed on different residences looking for that man's remains. A look at legal records of Story versus the state of Texas reveal a bunch of important facts. 1. Story versus state refers to unlawfully, this is about Story, unlawfully and willfully assaulting A.H. Knox, putting the said Knox in fear of life and bodily injury by using and exhibiting firearms, with fraudulently taking from the person and possession of the said Knox $3,037 in money, certain Liberty bonds, and United States Treasury savings certificates. So right off the bat, this sounds very different than the pleasant conversation, the chit-chat we had from the first article that sounded like just a couple of buddies chatting and having a laugh about a bad joke. This is a legitimate robbery. 2. Story versus State, 107 Texas Criminal 266269. About 3:40 p.m. on the date of the alleged offense, 2 masked persons entered said bank with drawn pistols. One of the robbers held a pistol on the cashier, Knox, the assistant cashier, Rucker, and the bookkeeper, Barhold, while the other robber entered the vault, took possession of the money and other valuables mentioned in the indictment, and that both of the robbers then left the bank, entering a waiting automobile and then driving rapidly away. 3. Story versus State, 107 Texas Criminal 266269. Continued. Hickman and other officers took the search warrant on the date of issuance, made a search of the premises, and took in their possession 1 watchman's clock, a safety deposit box containing papers, receipts, and coins, an oxygen tank, automobiles, and all sorts of other articles, as set out on the return of said writ. Hickman and other officers testified to finding these articles in and about a barn, under rocks, and at various places on the premises. There's tons more information about the Story Gang and within the history of Denton, Texas online. But for now, we can put a lid on February 1926 and end on something of a high note, I think. For that, we head north and east to DeSoto, Missouri, where approximately $4,000 of a total of over $10,000 of stolen loot was recovered. The bank had been robbed, the American Bank had been robbed December 30th, 1925, so It's a 1925 robbery, not a 1926 robbery. Sounds like a story of guilt or guilty conscience. A farmer named William Perkins confessed his involvement in the robbery and actually led the police officers to his farm. Out in the field they go. Perkins with a shovel digs up four old, well, they weren't old at the time, they're old now, but digs up 4 coffee cans that held gold, silver, and currency. And as of February, we don't know the resolution for Perkins and his unnamed partner or partners in crime. So as that information becomes available, we'll update it in the video, though not in on the tracker. And thus ends February 1926 bank heists. I want to thank you for spending your time with Decades of Heistery. Until next time.